Welcome to this episode of the Smarter Business Podcast. This is a podcast where we like to talk to business professionals who are doing interesting things with video. If you like what you hear today, you find things interesting, please subscribe, share, review this podcast. It's available on YouTube and all of the major podcasting platforms. Today's guest is Erik Eustice of the Sea Marketing. Do you do that on purpose with the name to make it like a little harder to intro of the sea?
No, no, and I struggle with that when I have to write it out. Sometimes I have to because I try not to do that, the double of, so that it actually is unintentionally more challenging. But it's
Yeah.
the downside that we accept because of all the upsides of the name, I think. So
It is a great name, and Erik, I will give you a chance to introduce yourself, and you can spin right into introducing of the sea if you'd like as well.
yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Neil, for asking me to be on the podcast. Um, yeah, so I'm Erik Eustice. Marketing captain is the term that I go by because when you start your own business, you can call yourself kind of whatever you want. And I'm not serious enough of an individual to call myself founder, partner, CEO, whatever. All fine titles, by the way, if that's your title, but I just didn't think it fit for me. So I started Of the Sea. We are pushing up against 11 years. We are I'd say a small advertising agency. I tell people that we build brands and advertising campaigns that demand undivided attention, that pleasantly defy expectations, and that create valuable encounters and conversations for our clients. So I haven't always done Of the Sea. I worked in media before this. I was an account executive. I was creating and managing advertising campaigns for a group of radio stations here in Western New York. And I did that for about 5 years and really learned a lot about marketing and advertising through that. My official schooling is actually in photography. Don't do a lot of photography these days other than the iPhone photography of, my children in my life, but kind of just parlayed those things. Had a good mentor over at Entercom, that media company, Steve Fortunato, who saw my ability to write and create and really helped me, I think, apply that. And anyway, yeah, so that's where we're at now. It's myself and 3 other individuals in downtown Buffalo. And yeah, we're having fun.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll echo the fact that your campaigns and so on, you definitely focus on creating a different voice for your clients, which I think is incredibly important compared to just hearing another radio ad or seeing another ad online or whatever it is. I think that's
Sure.
you all do an incredible job with that. So,
Thank you.
um,
Appreciate that.
yeah, no problem. And if you had to boil down what you do to one sentence, I'm going to say that you already kind of said that, right?
Yeah, it's
So
that whole demand
that's your
attention,
whole,
defy
yeah.
expectation. Yeah,
So,
exactly. And create
so,
encounters. Yeah.
so we'll pass over that. Very well rehearsed, by the way, that you have
Oh,
that sentence ready to go, right? Good for
it took me a
networking
long
meetings.
time to get, even though I do this, because it's like it's hardest to do for yourself. It took me a long time to get to that one sentence. Yeah, it's actually a recent phenomenon, probably in the last year and a half or so.
Do you want to do it again just for fun?
Yeah. Thanks for the chance, though. We'll leave him wanting more.
All
Yeah,
right.
gotta leave that audience wanting
You have
more.
to rewind this podcast if you want to hear it again.
That's
Awesome.
right.
But everybody check out Of the Sea. It is a great local agency here in Buffalo. And because I didn't get a good segue there, we're going right to the notes here and we're going to start talking Vidwheel Creator Network. So part of the reason that I asked you on the podcast today is this month is Video Podcast Month on the Vidwheel Creator Network. You and Matt from Renown Creative recently started a podcast earlier this year. Do you want to kind of talk about the concept behind the podcast and what you all are doing there?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's called Eric and Matt Like Ads. my co-host Matt Zelasco. Yeah, he's actually of a competing, I guess we're friendly, but friendly competitors, but competing advertising agency here in Buffalo. And when we decided to do the podcast, we barely knew each other. We had had a couple encounters previously and knew some of the same people. I think generally had an awareness of each other and some moderate degree of respect for each other's approaches. But we didn't really know a ton about each other. And I checked LinkedIn one day, and there's a message from Matt in LinkedIn asking me if I would like to co-host a podcast about advertising. I thought, well, there's a shady idea. Yeah, let's do this, right? Thinking on paper with all the reasons you say no to that, I'm like, yeah, let's say yes to that. Turns out that Matt had just had a couple pops at lunch that day, and so he didn't have the inhibitions to stop himself from sending that message. And I'm glad that he did. So we actually joke about that. So that's true. That's how some of these things do occur, right? So if you're thinking, well, this must have been a really strategic, kind of decision. No, it completely was in the moment. And slightly influenced by beer, I think.
Alcohol induced podcast. Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
and so he was an admirer from afar then, do you think? Was he kind of a secret admirer type? He saw what you were doing on
You
LinkedIn
know
and
what?
he
Knowing Matt as well as I know now, I'd say, yeah, he was a bit of a sycophant. He was trying to start the Erik Eustice fan club. Membership one. Yeah, I think he's just seeing some of the stuff that I was, the way I was engaging. My persona. We do this for our clients, right? Is create, these personality frameworks, and you got to know if a brand, you think of a brand as if it were a person, it would have personality traits. So like I've applied that to Of the Sea, and naturally they kind of blend with what my traits are. And so on LinkedIn, I've got this, hopeless romantic, ad nerd, smartass kind of like combination of things going on. So that's how I show up on LinkedIn. All right. So I'm usually doing 1 or 2, 3 of those kind of things when I'm posting, commenting, replying. And so I think he was mildly entertained by it, but also he saw my take on advertising, my take on brand, my take on identity, and I didn't realize until we started getting to know each other better in planning the podcast that we agree on not all things, but a lot of things. Like in our business, I feel like that's a little rare that we would have that much in common because everyone kind of has their own take and theories on things. So we thought that was pretty refreshing, and I think that's how we really hit it off. And I kind of had a sense that he was a bit of an instigator, bit of a smart ass, kind of poking the bear to see what would happen in his content. So I think that's kind of what initially I think attracted us to each other.
Yeah, excellent. And it's got you two both have some good chemistry on there. They're very entertaining episodes for
Oh, thank you.
anybody who, wants to check them out. I feel like the best way to do them, are they just video? That's the only place I've seen them is on
Yeah,
YouTube
we
or
thought about doing audio, and then we realized that we're really showing. So it's Eric and Matt like ads.
right.
So we're basically reviewing an ad, usually a famous ad, a well-known ad, could be, from way back when, could be contemporary. They're pretty much TV video ads, right? So it's hard to really make that work well through audio. We had a plan to do an audio version of it, and we realized this probably works best in video. So it's on YouTube, and we primarily distribute through LinkedIn. And that's something, again, we're going to be working on as we roll into season 2 next year.
Yeah, and so as a traditional audio person, you just explained why video. Are you more comfortable on video, like the format that you two have, or would you have, I guess, preferred reviewing radio commercials or something like that?
Oh, I'm very comfortable. I mean, like, to me, the creative is the creative, and well, yeah, I think radio advertising is terribly effective and cost effective for a lot of local businesses. Television also uses, well, it has the visual component. It's also a sonic medium. And so it's also very emotive. And, so to me, print, they all work. They're all good. It's just a matter of, like, what's your strategy, and how do you use those tools effectively. So I'm very comfortable on a camera. Growing up, people would tell me, And this definitely went to my head, Eric, have you ever thought about acting? You ever thought about acting? I never actually, other than like a play fest, my senior year of high school, I never really got into it. But I've always kind of liked um, entertaining people, like I don't mind, ask anyone who knows me. I don't mind being the center of attention. And so like getting in front of a camera, I've always felt comfortable doing that. So I wasn't intimidated. We coach some of our clients to try to create video and do things. And they do, whether it's in front of a camera or just like our radio clients that, are in front of a mic having to voice those things. It can be very intimidating for people. And I didn't choose this, just for some reason, I'm not. I don't know. It just comes to me. So.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an important aspect, obviously, to creating content the way you are. So that's an important piece. That's something we talk about a lot in the Creator Network is getting over that initial hump, right? And
Mm-hmm.
every time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. Or as our
Yeah.
last podcast guest put it, you get a little bit better. It doesn't get easier, but you get a little bit better at it, and it feels
Yeah.
easier, and
That's a good way to look at it.
it's a good cycle to get into. So you did bring up in their strategy, and earlier on you talked about maybe not necessarily having a strategy. Did you, after you all got together on this podcast, kind of develop a strategy for going forward, or was it just like, let's try it, see what happens? You both have the resources, as agencies, to kind of give it a shot and see if the chemistry is good, see if you build a following, and go from there. So what was the approach?
Yeah, so there wasn't like a strategy of like where we were like, we really need to do a podcast. It would be fun to do a podcast. And then once that decision was made, it was like, okay, we probably should plan this thing. We probably should structure it and figure out, what is this thing? Why would anyone want to watch it? You know, what's the dynamic going to be? Like we got this co-host model where our guest is the ad, right? So we don't
Yeah.
necessarily have like a third party coming in where we're interviewing. We're really doing the banter kind of thing around the ad itself. And so for us, we're like, so what were our reasons for doing it? We wanted to have fun, for sure. We wanted to do something that would challenge us. This was definitely way more difficult and complicated, though it's a simple idea, and you shouldn't like psych yourself out about doing it, because it's a lot easier to do than I think people think. But it is also more complicated than you might think when you're just like, oh yeah, how hard could that be? You kind of said it earlier, pre-show, people see these things and when they're well done, they just look so like simple and natural, but there's a lot that goes into making it look simple and natural. So we did plan it out to kind of figure out like what would kind of be the arc of each episode, how would it flow. We had this like really silly notion that we could keep these things to like 15 to 20 minutes. And there's like, and everyone that knows us completely just laugh their ass off, because they're like, there's no way Eric and or Matt are going to keep anything to 15 to 20 minutes. And we have not yet been able to do that. But we wanted to have fun. We wanted to challenge ourselves. We wanted to, be able to, I guess, create some content that would help show a little bit of our personality, help to engage our network and grow our network, and also show that we know what we're talking about when it comes to the craft of advertising. It's what we do. We want to do more of it for a long time, right? So this is definitely a marketing strategy for us. It wasn't the primary reason for doing it. I can't say that either of us have any like clients or like direct kind of business relationships as a result of it at this point. We've been doing it for less than a year. We launched it in April.
I
I mean, we
think it was
started talking
April.
about it in like
Yeah.
February, and we met once a week, every week through Zoom, just to plan it out. And then finally, just picked a day and said, this is the day that we're going to record. And it was a little nerve wracking. And even though I feel like this is kind of like a natural thing for me to do, I was super nervous about it. And the first episode was a little rough going, but you did it. To your point, we did it, and then we're like, okay, great. The second one was like a completely different experience. I felt like I
Yeah.
owned the thing, and everyone after that just got stronger and stronger.
Yeah, it's incredible even if you're pretty well accomplished, right? And like you said, kind of being able to speak to the camera or on mic or anything like that. Like I had a similar experience when I went live on LinkedIn a couple of months ago. Like that for it's different enough that the nerves
Hmm.
come back, and then you push through it, and yeah, it gets less intimidating as you go forward.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
out of your response there, I've got a few questions. I'll see if I can get them
Sure.
all in straight here. Um, Number one is, so like we talk a lot about. I always tell people the easiest way to create content is to talk to somebody smarter than you, which is what I'm doing right now, and then record it.
Right.
Right, done
Sure,
content.
sure,
We'll have
sure.
25 minutes of content when we're all done here, and
Yeah.
then you can hack it up into smaller bits. I know you're doing the co-host type thing, so it's
Hmm.
probably both you and Matt thinking, you know, that they're chatting with somebody else, but it probably makes it that much easier, right? It'd be a lot harder
Hmm.
to go on and monologue about that ad versus having that banter with Matt. I guess that's
Agreed.
less of a question and more of a.
No, no, you're 100%. Two things, because um, there's accountability to make sure that it gets done. You have a date, right? Someone's expecting you. It's like working with a personal trainer, right? Like, or you have a running partner. Someone's expecting you to be there, right? So you can't make an excuse for why you can't get to it this week, though summer got in our way and we had a little bit of that going on, but that affected both of us. Um, and then yeah, like, and then it's just, yeah, because you might blank on something, or and they've got something to say, or you're maybe not quite on, but they're totally on this week, and then you feed off of that. So having a partner in it, yeah, it's I think infinitely easier to accomplish. Yeah.
That's actually that I love that point. Like the accountability partner aspect of it, you can't underrate, right? You don't want to let somebody else down. On that same note, we talked before we started recording here about some of the challenges, and one of them was maybe just scheduling, right? When you have two busy
Hmm.
professionals, you hit summer, there's kid stuff, there's vacation. Um, that kind of getting both people on the same schedule is one challenge. What are some of the other challenges that you faced starting up with this?
Well, I think there's the, what are you going to call it? There's some of the planning stuff, right? Like, what are you going to call it? You got to create, and we have the resources internally, as both being agencies, but you've got, some graphic design stuff. What's it going to look like? What's the visual style going to be? How are you get the format of it, I guess. So that was part of it. But I think you slog through that stuff and you just get it done. Um, I think the sharing it, as much as you think you're good at what you do, there's always that, like, well, will people like this? Are they going to like me? Like, did I do a good job at that? So there's the sharing it and hoping that people are going to enjoy it, and trying not to look at, well, how many views did we, because right now, like, we don't get a lot of views, and we make a joke out of it like that. Almost in every episode, we kind of try to bring up the fact that the only two people probably watching are our mothers, right? So like, and when you've got 8 views on a video, it's like, maybe they both watched it a few times from different devices with different IP addresses. I don't know. So, so there's a little bit of that, right? Like confidence, and sharing it, putting it out there. When you have it, we try to have opinions, and some of the stuff that we've talked about in the ads, like, what's cool about advertising is it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a product of culture. And, so depending on the time when an ad was produced, you have what was going on at that time, the context of that, and then you have like what's going on now. And so we actually have watched some ads that were either explicitly dealing with cultural issues, or were not explicitly dealing with them, but because of what's happening in our culture now, it became relevant. And so when you start to talk about those things, and there's different opinions on those, and you try to do it in a respectful way that just really has the conversation, rather than trying to pigeonhole something. There is always the, like, because everyone's really super sensitive.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, are we gonna You know,
You're
so
gonna
it's just some of that. Like, where are the lines? You know, where do you like? So you have honest, provocative, opinionated conversation that's still respectful and because we're still trying to discuss ads, right? Like, we're not trying to make this like a political thing. And I think
yeah,
we were successful in that, but I think there's some of it. So depending on what your subject matter is or what the format is, like there could be some challenges of knowing where the lines are and
yeah.
making sure that you stay within them, you know?
Well, and yeah, I mean that's always a balancing act, right? And because uh, I think you deal with that in an agency setup too, right? Like
Hmm.
if you're not making some people dislike you or maybe not agreeing with your message, then like are you making anybody really agree with it too, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to be
Yeah.
too beige about the whole thing, I
Hmm.
guess, is
Hmm.
maybe
No,
the way I
you're
would
right.
put
I
it.
agree with
So,
that for sure.
yeah.
That's a
So I
great point.
guess on that note, I watched this last one, and your ad that you discussed was a great one. Do you remember it? Yeah, Coleman Sweeney.
Cohen
Uh,
Sweeney. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. World's biggest. Yeah. Yeah.
So that it was incredible. I hadn't seen that before, but
Oh, yeah.
that was the discussion was great. But one of the things I wanted to ask that I didn't put in the note, so I wouldn't ruin the surprise, right? There was
Okay.
some discussion about who the big is between you and Matt. He is not here to defend himself. Do you want to let everybody know who it is?
Oh, it's me. It's definitely me. Well, if you watch enough of the episodes, I think it'll be pretty clear. Like, I'm far pettier than he is. I ride him a lot harder than he rides me. Definitely, I talk over him all the time. But this is part of like the persona, right?
Right.
I'm doing that.
You-
And when I'm in a meeting with a client, I don't steamroll them. But when I'm on the podcast with Matt, I steamroll it. I steamroll him
Yeah.
hard.
And you got the whiskey there. Like it all kind of
Yeah,
fits, right? Stronger
yeah,
drinks, stronger opinions. It
yeah.
works. It
Yeah,
works.
well,
So
that was the one where he was drinking a Truly, right?
yes. It was
I mean, come on. I
a
mean,
white claw
he's
or a
asking, yeah,
truly
or
or
whatever.
something.
He's
Yeah.
asking for it. I mean, come on. I mean, I love the guy. I love Matt. Matt, I love you. You know, I love you. And I think if you want to drink a Truly, you should drink that. I celebrate that. But I'm absolutely going to bust your balls for it, for sure.
Would
Yeah.
you recommend next time maybe he pours it into a cup and then nobody would know?
Or maybe like a sippy cup. Yeah, it's a great
Perhaps,
idea.
perhaps.
Yeah. No, yeah, but here's
uh,
the thing, like he's you know, and it's not like we're drinking in every episode. We usually do these on Friday afternoon, so that's kind of like our excuse for doing that. And usually he's drinking whiskey or a respectable beer or something like that. So
okay. Well, yeah. Not in the Sweeney episode, so
no, 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 no. And I really love that you brought that up. Thank you.
yeah. Well, I wanted to give you a chance, right? Unimpeded to kind of talk about that. Okay. So, one other thing that I was going to come back to,
Sure.
like from a technical standpoint, you all just record through Zoom, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
And
we use Zoom. Yep.
oh, is
Go
there
ahead.
any post production or anything? I guess is the
Yeah, yeah. So we Zoom that. Matt handles the getting that file over to gentleman Patrick, who does our editing for us, and so he'll like clean it up the best he sees fit. He'll put the animated intro in. He'll do a little outro thing. Usually we have some outtakes that are at the end of each episode, so he'll toss those on the back, and then he'll send it over. I'll take a look at it. So part of what I do is I watch each episode and I'm taking notes. I'm looking for like timestamps of just completely cut this, cut that, here or there, little things. And then I'll also give him a list of vignettes. So we want to have maybe like 3 or 4 vignettes, maybe 2 for each of Matt and I. Then
right.
that's what we're sharing on LinkedIn, right? So
Yeah.
that's that 30-minute-ish kind of, clip. And then we've got the full episode. So, I create some of those notes. Matt takes those and uses those in the YouTube description, and that's pretty much, yeah. It's pretty run and gun. Our setup is pretty basic. I am using a Yeti microphone, but what you can't see is I have my laptop propped up on a cardboard box so
It's
that it's just a
beautiful.
little bit higher. So that's how high
Yes.
tech we're doing this thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm using a cardboard box, people.
So I do consulting for a lot of this type of, remote
Yeah.
shooting and video, and I actually recommend the cardboard box. I just put out a
Really?
video. Yes. So,
Nice.
books
Look at
or a
that.
cardboard box is the last training I put out. I put them both as options. So you're
Oh,
right on it,
wow.
man.
Man,
You're right
cool.
on it.
Cool.
All right. So I got one more question on the podcast, which
Sure.
is, do you consider it now a success? Or is it kind of getting there? Like, are there positive signs? Look, you're going into season 2. That's a good sign.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, it's just in some ways it's a success. Of course, it's always like, what do you define, success as? We're doing it. It happened. All right. Yeah, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but still most people aren't doing them. All right. So I think it's a success that we're doing it. We're having fun. And that to me is a success. We're getting sharper at our craft as a result of this. I'm learning a ton, and so that I'd say is a success. And we're getting it out there too, right? So it is being distributed. Yeah, we don't have like on YouTube, we don't have a ton of views. There's probably some best practice type stuff that we're looking into that we could be doing differently, and we could take it more seriously. To be honest with you, like it kind of was like a hey, we'll do it. We'll show up on a Friday afternoon. We know the episode that the ad we're going to review, and we'll have done a little research, maybe taken some notes. But I think that they could be. I appreciate you saying that they're entertaining and fun to watch. I think we can be better at it though. We can have more of a structure, which is something we just talked about in our planning meeting last Friday for episode or for season 2. Exactly, more of a tighter kind of formula for the episodes, which we think will still accomplish all of the objectives, but we think we might actually be able to get this down into half the amount of time that it's taken us to do them. And I think that would be helpful for getting more people to watch them and watch them through. So we're definitely still learning as we go. Um, so I think there's things to improve about it and probably things that I don't even realize yet. But I would say, yeah, it's a success. We're happy with where it's at.
Nice. And yeah, I mean, those vignettes and everything that you use and put on LinkedIn, I don't know if you are. I didn't see them on YouTube, but put them there and have
The
them link back to full episodes as well as
good
one
point.
of my
Good,
suggestions.
never
Yeah.
occurred to me. Yeah, we were
Yeah.
just using them as the teasers to kind of get
Yeah.
people over there. So you're right. That's a good point. I'm gonna actually write that down.
Yeah. It's just a little more consumable, right? For your average viewer. So
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. Thank you.
All right. So we're on to one. I use one question that ties between every episode of this. It's called the Smarter Business Podcast. So I
Mhm.
ask, what is one thing that you've done to make your or client's business smarter? This is kind of the business advice portion.
Sure. This might sound like a complete setup, but it's take people's advice is the thing that I think for me has made the biggest difference, and I'm really even more committed to now in my business. Well, I was always open to the advice of others and sought mentorship and certain things. I think I did get to the place where you kind of get a level of success and you become okay with that. And maybe you close in a little bit and you just kind of like keep your head down, you keep doing what you're doing and you're less, not that you're not open to it, though you're just not looking for it as much, perhaps, at least for me. All right. And so that you can only do that for so long before things start to kind of like crowd around you and you realize this isn't really, I'm not having as much fun, like this is, it's working, but like, where is this leading to? So yeah, I would say it's, taking the advice of other people. I've recently chosen to develop an advisory board for of the sea. So I have some consultants that are working with me in various capacities. And I said, it would be great if we actually worked as a team directly and had some regular communication and meetings. And we're going into doing some strategic planning as a result of that. And I can see already the difference that that's making for us and the difference that it is going to continue to make as we grow into who I think we can become. So that would be it.
That's That's excellent. That is great advice, right? You can't get to a point where you think you know it all, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be this way and all that. If you're open to input, yeah, it's always a good thing. So I love that. That's a good one. And I always ask in any interview I do, including these ones, just one last open-ended question, which is there anything else, right? Like sometimes our conversations knock the point loose. Sometimes there's nothing there. So, do you have any last thoughts before we shut down?
Sure, I have one more, and I think it ties into our approach to the podcast. It ties into our approach at Of the Sea to doing the work that we do for our clients, but also of how we kind of see ourselves and present ourselves. Um, it's being yourself, and I know this is like such a cliche, but I feel like that's what we're doing with the podcast. I think that's what makes it you know, entertaining because like, well, yeah, I'm doing a little bit of a persona. Like that really is just kind of like an embellished version of myself. And it's the same thing with Matt. And the more that I've been willing to kind of trust who I am and to kind of just be that, things have gotten better, right? And I feel like our success has been richer as a result of that, professionally and personally. A lot of things in personal life I think are true there. So just like an encouragement, because people that are watching this might be thinking about, okay, well, I've got my own initiative. I have a podcast, or I'm starting a podcast, or I have a business, or whatever. And I know we already know this, but I think there's a lot of things that we know, but that we don't always like really like live by, and I think that the more I've lived by that kind of rule of, being myself, it's things have only gotten better. So
Yeah, and that's especially prevalent right now, right? And kind of at the forefront for a lot of people. There's an emphasis on authenticity that I think is like a really exciting shift, because we got to see your cat run through the Zoom meeting for the last year, and you
yeah,
get to see the inside of people's homes, and like everything's a little less polished.
yeah.
There's a little less of, you got to put on the business mask, and a little
Hmm.
more of like, hey, this is me. You were
Yeah.
ahead of the curve on that maybe, but
Well, it's just that's just middle
yeah.
child syndrome. It's just me trying to get attention, I think. But no, but it is right. And so like what really separates you, right? Like, so if you're gonna do a podcast, don't do your version of your favorite podcast or someone else's podcast or what you think a podcast is supposed to be. Like, you're creating the advertising. Like, the only thing that separates our clients, it's like, yeah, they're really good at what they do, but they're just doing the same thing that other people are doing. You could choose other people. Why would you choose them? You would choose them because it's them. But if you don't know who they are really, then they're just people who do that thing. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's like we don't need more of people just doing things that other people already do. We need you to do your version of the thing that only you could do. Right. And I know I'm not the person that has invented that idea. It's just that really resonates to me. And I can say that it works. Right.
Yeah, and now I've had a conversation along those lines very often, where like a lot of people are worried about competition, other things like that. If you truly are putting yourself out there in a way that people choose you because you're you, or because you do something a little bit differently,
Hmm.
like you eliminate the whole concept of like, well, this guy
Yes.
does that too, right?
Yes.
So yeah,
Yes. Yes.
you eliminate competition unless you're
Absolutely.
selling a commodity, I guess. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Well, which
yeah,
which was
yeah,
exactly, which is not what it's not what
right,
we're talking
right,
about,
right,
but yeah,
right.
100%.
But
Yeah, well put.
I think that's an awesome place to end. It's been great chatting with you, Eric. Thank you for taking the time to talk to our audience and give us some insights on your podcast and advertising in general. To all of you who tuned in, thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. Subscribe, review, and share if you like any of what you heard. And that'll do it. We used to always shake hands in studio, so
Yeah,
we'll do
yeah.
the Zoom wave.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Well, thanks. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Neil. Thanks again.
yeah, thank you.